Welcome to Soil Science and Management, Chapter 14, and today we're going to talk about fertilizers. So, after we complete this chapter, we're going to be able to distinguish all the different forms of fertilizer, what fertilizer sources are for each nutrient, how to perform some fertilizer calculations, how to use those fertilizers, and then list some effects that those fertilizers have on the soil. So, basically, a fertilizer is typically a material that is applied to the soil to supply some essential element. They can be minerals, they can be organic, they can be synthetic organic, they can be an inorganic. All of these different forms are very common forms of fertilizer. We think about fertilizer and basically, those synthetic organic petroleum-based fertilizers that come in 12, 12, 12 or 15, 15, 15. But there are so many other things that you can put out that are inorganic or even organic material. One of the things that has been around for quite a while is something called Milorganite, which is basically an organic fertilizer that is more or less the waste product of the Milwaukee wastewater treatment plants. And this has been used for years and years and years to get fertilizer into the ground, as well as biosolids and organic material to help with biological activity within the soil. So there are a few different forms. There are liquid applications or pressurized liquid. There are liquid applications, there are dry, and there are slow release. So pressurized liquids is basically injected into the soil, and anhydrous ammonia is very common to do this. Now, anhydrous ammonia is a very, very, very potent ammonia source, and this is typically done either highly diluted or before you plant your plants, allowing that ammonia to what's the word I'm looking for? Not neutralize, but become a little bit more less active in the soil. And then in golf course applications, very common is fluid or liquid. These are applied with either can be applied inside the irrigation system or can be sprayed on with a ride-on sprayer. Sometimes you use fertilizers and certain pesticides at the same time. These can be combined applications. Also, there are dry, and this can be something that's pulverized into a powder. There are granulars, there's prills. These are typically applied directly to the soil and using some sort of a measuring device and metering device. And there's also slow release, water activated. These are going to be like a granule that has some sort of coating that will allow the material to dissolve slowly, continuing to feed the plants for a longer period of time. So there are various carriers that are important for these different nutrients. So nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, they all have specific carriers. Nitrogen, we've talked about that. That's ammonium. That's nitrate. Potassium is a muriate of potash. There are phosphate ions. And then each one of these secondary elements and the trace elements all have certain carriers that will release the nutrients that the plants can uptake. Plants don't typically take pure elements up into their through their osmosis. They typically take a ion or a compound, something that they have access to. Just because the compound has nitrogen in it, for example, doesn't mean that the plant can use it. There's plenty of compounds that the plants will just reject because the nitrogen is unavailable to them in those certain compounds. Sometimes these fertilizers can be made by mixing several of these different carriers. As I stated before, some of the common, triple 12, triple 15. Something we used to use quite a bit of was 6-20-20. This is basically percentages of the different carriers within that bag of fertilizer in the following order: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, or NPK. And those triple 15s are great for golf course applications where you're trying to look for just a general application of food, whereas that 6-20-20 is really a great starter food. So if you're seeding and you would like to have good sustained growth through the germination process, that 6-20-20 is great because it has just a little bit of nitrogen to kind of push, but the phosphorus and potassium are able to really make the plant grow strong. Typically, the contents of the fertilizers do not equal 100. So as I've showed you, the last two examples, triple 15, that is approximately 45% of the total of the plant, of the fertilizer, and then 6-20-20, that's 46%, and so that's 46% nutrients and 54% other ingredients. Whereas in this example on the screen here is triple 10, and so that means there's 70% other ingredients, and typically those are binders or these slow release agents. Sometimes they're wetting agents to help get those nutrients into certain areas. So nitrogen is listed as in its elemental form, whereas phosphorus and potassium are listed in their oxidized forms. These are how the plant materials are listed. So typically when you do some math, you have to take into account, or they may have taken into account, how much of that, for example, muriate of potash, K2O, has a little bit of oxygen in there, and so that could be a conversion where you're converting back to the amount of potassium that you're trying to put down. So it's really important to select the proper fertilizer for your proper application. What is your crop? What is your plant? What time of year are you trying to do this? What kind of method can you do this? Are you trying to put this out in a slow release form? Really important is how much does the fertilizer cost. Run into several times in the golf course industry where we really wanted to put out a certain fertilizer, but petroleum costs had gone up quite staggering, and we had to put out something completely different. And it still works, still does the job, but it's not exactly the application that we were hoping to put out. Something really important to consider here is do you want to use an organic material? Some of the organic fertilizers have a very small percentage of nutrients in them, but it's kind of by design, because those nutrients have to be broken down further, so they are in essence a slow release fertilizer because of the continued processing that is done within the soils by the micronutrients that need to break down those varying organic materials. So there are a couple simple rules for when you're going to want to pick certain fertilizers. Nitrates work best in your spring with your cool season crops. Ammonia is great for your fall. Fall applications, good to put your grass to bed in the wintertime. And then nitrate's great for container plants. Basically, you don't want to have a lot of ammonium in your container plants because they can start to smell. They start to smell like rotting grass clippings, excuse me. And then ammonium nitrate, ammonium nitrogen is good for acid-loving plants because the ammonium starts to break down into varying types of acids. So it's good for those plants to kind of have that comfort level of liking to be in with a little bit of acid. And then, like I just spoke earlier, fertilizers, they fluctuate in price from year to year and even from season to season. So understanding when things go up, certain times of the year with lots of holidays, petroleum prices go up, and so does cost of making fertilizer. So you have to take that into account when you are selecting the fertilizer you'd like to use. So there are different times that you want to apply your fertilizer. You can fertilize before you plant, so you can have some drawbacks to that. Is some of the nitrogen will leach away. Not all of it is available near the seedlings. It does bring the soil fertility to a good level before you plant those plants. You can add in as much of the phosphorus and potassium as you need. There are a few different ways to do this. That's going to be broadcast either with liquid or a granular product, or you can inject it directly into the soil. Also, how I've always done my plantings is fertilizing at the same time. This makes sure that you get the nutrients near the seedlings where they would like it. Helps to ensure you get a good pop of the seeds. The seeds are able to grasp onto those nutrients quite quickly, and then they are able to grow quite healthily as quickly as possible. Fertilizing after applications, one disadvantage that I've always noticed is that sometimes plants can not have enough nutrients in the soil, and the seedlings can stress themselves out. Unfortunately, in some of the times that it stresses themselves out, they don't grow as well. Once that plant has been established, obviously fertilizing is great. This is going to be the best time. There are all different kinds of applications. You have granular applications. You can use your fertigation system. You can spray it on using foliar feeding. There's numerous different ways of fertilizing your plants once they're established in the soil. So, very important to understand is anytime you're applying fertilizers, it's going to alter the pH or the acidity of the soil. And some common things to remember: any kind of ammonium fertilizer is going to lower your pH. The nitrate fertilizers are going to raise your pH. So that could be a good way of, if you have a certain time of year or you have a certain type of soil that is either high in pH or low in pH, you can pick your nitrogen fertilizer based on which one will help you to correct or fix that problem. Salinity is another important thing to consider, because basically you're putting in salt. Anytime you're putting in a fertilizer is a adding to the total dissolved solids of the soil. So you want to make sure that you're only applying what you want to apply. You don't ever want to over apply, and you got to make sure that you are very careful while you are mixing or adding fertilizer to a application device, because if you spill fertilizer in an area, grass or whatever it is that you're trying to grow there could take a year or two to come back in those areas because of the amount of salts that will load into those areas. In this chapter, talked about fertilizer and how it's utilized, what it can be used, different application methods, and different application types. So I thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time.